As the Money Burns is an original podcast by Nikki Woodard. Based on historical research, this is a deep exploration into what happened to a set of actual heirs and heiresses to some of America's most famous fortunes when the Great Depression hits. Each episode has 3 primary sections. Section 1 is a narrative story. Section 2 goes deeper into the historical facts. Section 3 focuses on contemporary, emotional, and personal connections. Story recap. Daisy Van Alen rushes across the Atlantic to pull her daughter Louise Van Alen away from the Mdivani spell. Now back to As the Money Burns. Jaded Luck. A fortune hunter makes the final play to capture his main prize, but his final move might involve his recently discarded former prey. Section 1 Story. Love and fortune are not always as compatible as one would hope. However, if one does not become too jaded, then one might find another chance, and this time, might get lucky. The week of April 9th, 1933, Bangkok, Siam, modern Thailand. The now slightly less chubby budding fashionista heiress Barbara Hutton has been traveling the South Seas, shopping for jade, visiting the sights, and trying to mend her broken heart. She sighs as the Conte Ross ocean liner gets closer to the docks. She prepares herself for another barrage of press questions and more disappointment and heartache. Notably, she is traveling fairly unchaperoned by standards of the day. Her companions are her secretary, Morley Kennerly, his wife and her longtime friend, Jean Kennerly, and French governess, surrogate mother, Germaine Tiki Tokay. These companions allow Barbara freedom to travel without her father, Franklin Hutton, and stepmother, Irene Curly Bodie Hutton, a mistake Franklin will soon regret. Throughout her travels, Barbara has continued correspondence with several beaux, Park Avenue lad James Blakely, and polo player Raymond Guest, among the mix. And of course, secretly, ruggedly handsome Russian Prince Alexis Mdivani, his ardent swooning thwarted in New York during this last winter by her family's rejection. At each port, Barbara longs and wishes that one might just come to her rescue and sweep her off her feet. So far, in nearly 10 weeks of travel, has been disappointed every time. Hasn't it been mentioned before? Barbara is the ultimate devotee of the idea of true love, though she hardly believes anyone will truly love her. And certainly not Alexis, who is madly in love with her best friend, the beautiful and seductive Sylvia de Rivas. Still, teenage girls, including heiresses, dream big, and none is bigger than a glamorous Prince Mdivani, whose 2 older brothers are married to millionaire starlets and singers. As she steps off the boat onto land, another lands by air. Maybe her luck will change. Stepping out of a Dutch airplane is none other than Prince Alexis, the formerly impoverished royal, now with his own mini fortune due to his recent divorce settlement. Traveling lightly with paper, pencil, and binoculars, he claimed to be going to investigate the Sino-Japanese situation, and what he meant was Barbara in the Orient. He has his orders and directions from his sisters, Princess Nina Divani Uberek and Princess Rusadana Rusi Divani Sert, plus Barbara's telegrams detailing her travel plans. Even without those telegrams, it wouldn't have been hard to locate Barbara. Her travels have been continually announced in the press, documenting every port of entry and exit and any potential romantic entanglements, coupled with the endless speculation, will she or won't she reunite and marry the prince? Confidently, he heads out. As Barbara and her companions check into their hotel, they are approached in the lobby, surprisingly, by Prince Alexis. Immediately, he and Barbara leave to have a private conversation. They first go into the nearby restaurant and later continue elsewhere, talking into the night. She nervously fiddles with the string of Jaded Luck monkeys about her wrist, her fingernails and toenails painted black while her lips are painted red, her deep blue eyes lost in thought. She has become quite a noted beauty. Barbara's resistance is weakening, as deep down she is swooning, though she is still heavily conflicted. She has always desired him. He's been her best friend and confidant for 5 years, listening patiently and understanding all her woes. He would be a fun companion and devoted to her, unlike those American boys needing to establish themselves more professionally. And now, could it be true? Alexis might be in love with her too? Here in this beautiful city with canals in the moonlight, he ardently pursues this reluctant lover. Dressed in polo style, showing off his muscles, which she loves so much. Their knees touching, holding hands, looking into her eyes, talking in a soothing, aristocratic tone. And still she resists. Not to be thwarted, he readily plays his final card. Alexis picks up the phone and speaks with the operator for an international call. On the other end is none other than former reigning it girl socialite and his now ex-wife, Louise Van Alen. Worked up in a furious haze, the livid Louise does the unthinkable. She threatens Barbara with blackmail. Either Barbara marries Alexis, or Louise will finally publicly reveal their scandalous tryst in Spain this last summer, which led to the divorce. Barbara's reputation will be ruined forever for any decent marital prospects. The next morning, Alexis makes one final proposal. Barbara finally relents. Later that afternoon, the American consul in Siam calls Franklin Hutton in Palm Beach, Florida. When Hutton takes the phone, he gets a shock. "Sorry to trouble you, sir, but your daughter is here and wants me to marry her to a Prince Mdivani. She is still underage and needs your consent." Franklin has to be fast on his feet. In 6 months, Barbara will turn 21. Then he will no longer have any dominion over her. Much more, her $26 million Woolworth inheritance has nearly doubled under his guidance, growing at about $2 million per year to easily $47 million. By most reports, that would be in 2024, $48 million per year to a total around $1.129 billion. Franklin has repeatedly claimed he is dead set against this particular deadbeat Georgian blackmailer wasting all those nickels and dimes. Alexis is from the Russian province and Soviet state of Georgia, like Stalin. However, that overall amount is so staggeringly large that would leave any good fortune hunter more than determined to secure the prize. Franklin asks to speak to his daughter, but Alexis answers instead. Alexis coolly warns Franklin, if the father protests too much, Alexis will find someone who will disregard the age requirement and marry them now. Franklin tries to delay and suggest a wedding in Paris during the summer, attempting to appeal to his daughter's silly romanticism in order to gain more time. Alexis, however, is far too clever and knows the ploy and ups the ante. They will agree to a summer Paris wedding only if Franklin announces the engagement right now. Through gritted teeth, Franklin agrees and will meet them in Paris to finalize details. Hopefully by then he will be able to extricate Barbara from the prince like he had with the dangerous millionaire playboy, Phil Plant. In their remaining days in Bangkok, Alexis stays devotedly by her side, never leaving her alone with her companions or other interferences. They visit tourist sites and spend a lot of time at the swimming pool of the American Sports Club. Prince Alexis grandly stops the car at every flower vendor and buys every flower in Bangkok, showering Barbara with attention and dreams of a large fancy wedding in Paris. Another no-expense-spared event, but this one will be celebrated, as Parisians and Europeans are less cynical over money, unlike the stiffer Americans. Alexis loves to spend money, and he mentions Anna Gold's Paris residence is up for sale. He also compares their wedding to Anna's wedding to her first husband, Count Boniface de Castellane. Ironically, Boni is the uncle-in-law to the prince's fiery love and Barbara's best friend, Sylvia de Rivas, now the Countess de Castellane. Has Barbara finally found her companion? her best friend, a prince, and maybe even true love all in one? Can an heiress really be this lucky in love? Friday, April 14th, 1933. A telegram is sent to Paris. Won the prize. Announce the betrothal. Saturday, April 15th, 1933, Bangkok, Siam. News leaks that Barbara herself has admitted to a restaurant hostess that she, the heiress, is tacitly engaged. Sunday, April 16th, 1933. Barbara and Alexis, along with the Kinnerleys and Tiki, board a ship for Saigon in French Indochina, today's Vietnam, with a few more stops before their wedding in Paris, where the showdown will continue. Do you seriously think Franklin will give up that easily? Another parent, socialite Queen Bee, Daisy Van Allen, had already mistakenly left her daughter Louise to the Mdivani mercy and fears a return to the royal family fold. Daisy now chaperones Louise as they travel aboard the ocean liner Ile-de-France. Unfortunately, Daisy has not fully extricated Louise from the Mdivani's grasp. They travel with Russie and her husband, Spanish painter Joseph Maria Sert, on his way to New York for the debut of his new murals at the new Radio City Music Hall, when another announcement is made. Tuesday, April 18th, 1933, Paris, France. Patriarch of the Marian Mdivanis, their father, Zachary Mdivani, passes away. He served the last Russian Tsar as a distinguished general in the Imperial Russian Army before fleeing the Bolshevik Revolution. Unlike his children, the general preferred his military title over their royal ones. Widowed, his obituary notes the prominent marriages of his adult children, with his daughter Russie's marriage to Sert, and each of his sons' more illustrious marriages to former and current wives in Hollywood and Louise, but no mention of Barbara. Clearly, his children have not allowed the announcement to deter their current plans, but they will likely play the sympathy cards as needed. There is little reason for them to be too deep in mourning. If anything, their father would have likely spoiled their fun. Meanwhile, the newly engaged fiancés immerse themselves in their romantic indulgences. And of course, this includes doing what Mdivanis like to do best, and that is spending money, going to various jewelry stores and dealers. Remember, Barbara's goal of this trip is to buy some exquisite jade, the translucent green stone thought to bring wisdom, serenity, luck, and friendship to its owner. As they inspect several pieces of jewelry, she shows off her jeweler's eyes with the ability to determine the value of a stone and setting. He loves watching over her as she shops for jade and other fine pieces. He believes in living life to the fullest. Somewhere along their way, Barbara finds a large black pearl platinum engagement ring. She delicately shows it to Alexis, who likes anything flashy. Enthusiastically, he buys it with the money from his divorce settlement from Louise. Wednesday, April 26, 1933, Singapore. Arriving from Indochina, Barbara is asked again about her current status and plans. Playing coy, she refutes that she is married or engaged or has any plans in that matter. Maybe Franklin still has a chance after all. 2 days later, she boards the ocean liner Citral with her companions and notably Prince Alexis and heads to Marseille, France. Maybe not. Section 2, History and Historiography. Once again, this is an episode I have been dying to tell since the beginning. I have slowly been uncovering details of this incident since about 2014 when I started to flesh out this particular story. There are 4 biographies on Barbara Hutton, plus 2 1930s expose articles. Each presents slightly different information about this event. 2 accounts have been known to over-embellish details, and 1 plagiarized from the other sources as well. And yet, I managed to uncover more information, specifically narrowing down the event to a solitary week. It's so hard when reading the past where sources attempt to encompass a person's entire lifespan to dedicate heavily into all these tiny specifics, especially without our digital resources and capabilities. Of course, the bigger reveals of our story are not so much about Barbara, but about the other players in this story. Prince Alexis Mdivani, his sister, Princess Rusidana Rusi Mdivani Sert, and Louise Van Alen, formerly Princess Mdivani. All important players in the saga, as well as Barbara's father, Franklin Hutton. In re-reviewing those later sources compared to the contemporary news articles, verifying and discrediting what might be true or merely speculation, especially when it comes to events leading to and in Bangkok. The more contemporary Cosmo articles by Elsa Maxwell and the later 10-part series by Adela Rogers St. John's very politely skim over the details of this trip, focusing more on the wedding plans, previous boyfriends, and such. Of course, both are dedicated to help reform any potentially damaging view of Barbara and even screw up on the timeline specifics. And of course, never mention the affair in Spain. They do, however, clearly indicate the nearly 5-year friendship between Barbara and Alexis and how she viewed him. A bit convenient, wouldn't you say? Both writers were writing flattering portrayals of Barbara. Decades later, her biographies could reveal more with other information and circumstances well known. Her 1960s biography by Dean Jennings is much more scathing and critical. The other biographies are written after her death, so the need for more delicacy and the changing times allowed for more blatant discussion on the touchier subject matter. Still, there is confusion and other matters that need clarification, and really diving in to get the timeline is one of the key factors in lining up what is fact and speculation. I know Louise blackmails Barbara as the final straw, but when and how, not certain. 2 different accounts. One implies in person, which was unlikely due to physical locations. Another by phone, likely. I don't know, it could have been by a letter or telegram. But still, when and where? Did that trigger the South Seas trip, or might have it occurred in Bangkok? Initially, I thought this trip happened earlier and in a different way. Only as the episode approached, I uncovered the articles detailing her travels in the South Seas, and yet the date for Bangkok was most elusive. I had to nail it down, and finally found the reference of them leaving for the next port. The week has been determined, and thus could line up the rest of the details. I have spent a considerable time tracking down details big and small. When I started and for the first few years, I searched for larger threads. Then for a period trying to get it into an actual show, I did more research, but only enough to frame a series and seasons. Picking up interesting details here and there. Back then, I could never be sure what later would be fictionalized or what contributions I might be able to make if we had a showrunner or writer take over the project. I was always worried my work would get dismissed or discounted. And now in telling the podcast, I can reveal all. I set it up to reveal everything as much as possible. I'm diving heavily into the details, micro details, things that mark the timeline getting fleshed out, questions popping up and needing more clarification. I unmask wonderful new details that question the past and present known facts. I had no idea I was going to come to this point. I have been trying to determine 2 things for this episode because it plays much larger into what we know about this story and its aftermath decades later, even after her biographies were written. I won't reveal the ending yet because that is part of the fun in the telling. However, it is getting juicier. Even little details like jewels have meaning and purpose. Part of the story of Barbara Hutton is definitely a story defined by jewels and jewelry. Her extensive, beautiful, historical, expensive, and expansive collection has a life and history of its own. Barbara was fascinated both by the Orient as well as its jewelry. Very well known for her collection, and a few pieces have larger significance. the provenance and history of them with their own value. Trivial, but they lead to overarching connections and threads to pay off later. Thus, for this episode, I had to clarify a few details to make sure I kept the story straight. As with everything else, there are only bits and pieces told here and there is a larger significance that will tie things together. While I might have assumed one piece wrong by date, thus the context only slightly altered, still remains much the same and thus a reason to note and document and point out. This story is a garden with many seeds planted to be harvested over time. Easter eggs and whatnot that will all make sense when the story is done being told. But for a warning, there are plenty of weeds in this flowery, intricate garden. Section 3, Contemporary and Personal Relevance. As mentioned, the story I'm telling has never been told this way before. I hope you are enjoying it as much as I am. This is the heart of what I'm seeking, the seduction, the romance, and, pending heartbreak. A new take, a new perspective, an experience into the human heart and soul. Of larger historical significance? Very unlikely. But on a human psychological level, very compelling. I know it might seem a little weird that my introductory, bonus, and anniversary episodes have a fairy tale, mythic story-like quality in them. But that mixes, my creative side with a literary device like allegory. When we think of other people's stories like the rich, famous, stars, celebrities, or whomever, there are some aspirational qualities. We see them with the rose-colored glasses of our fantasies. That is, if we're not too dripping with anger and envy over their perceived advantages. Yes, what might be perceived as positives generally has an equal level of negatives too. I got sucked into these particular tales because they did feel more like fairy tales gone awry. Not as historically significant as creating an invention or discovering a new world or, God forbid, politics or war. More like the next level in generation that gets to enjoy the good life after those events, and yet something as far amiss and still relatable in the oddest of ways. When I began the journey of uncovering these tales, I was rebuilding my life after divorce and trying to date again. Can we say the experience was less than stellar? It's not that I need sappy romance, but I do want love and connection. And every time I have found myself single again since then, I fear what new wave of terror will be unleashed. Come on, it's not hard to be a little jaded with such bad luck. Porn has rotted brains, and technology has exacerbated bad behavior. Now with AI, artificial intelligence, mucking up this frontier, I have no idea how to fathom how society will proceed further. Much of dating has gotten crasser and more vulgar. Not that there hasn't always been an element of that, but in the past, there was a little more decency. And if not to sound too prudish, there was considered limited acceptable behavior, especially towards a female who for all purposes handled herself with dignity and respect. That has melted away and often seems to make one target for more disgusting attacks. Though people are deluded into thinking they are compliments, objectification is not and never will be for sex, money, fame, greed, or whatever underlying motive. And while I know these tales have darker twists, I'm still mesmerized by them. Of course, to fall in love, there needs to be something more. A hope, a desire, a dream. However, fairy tales aren't all nice and pretty. They have quite dark and sinister twists and turns. And these tales are real-life fairy tales. But instead of princesses, we have heiresses who are trying and sometimes do become actual princesses. So don't miss out, because these twists and turns are going to be quite a ride. Podcasting is definitely a different world and journey. It opens up so many possibilities and has brought some fun and interesting connections. Over this last year, I have had several interactions with Ye Olde Crime Podcast, which is not your typical true crime or history podcast. Nope. Sisters Lindsay, Valenty, and Madison Stangl discuss crimes from the 1800s or earlier with quite interesting twists, some from murder and witch hysteria to lighter and more trivial fare. If you want to learn more about human nature and the consistencies even in our oddities over time, you will want to check out Ye Olde Crime Podcast. Recently, I guested on their April 6, 2024 Cramp Word Challenge with Lindsay, where they give 2 old sayings and I had to determine the meaning. Want to check it out? Then go to Ye Olde Crime Podcast. Links in the notes and transcript. If you enjoy As the Money Burns, then please share, like, and subscribe. Next, when we return to As the Money Burns. After years of struggle, a hostess gets to throw her most famous and popular annual event once again. So come and see who attends. Until then, As the Money Burns is an original podcast written, produced, and voiced by Nikki Woodard based on historical research. Archival music has been provided by Past Perfect Vintage Music. Check out their website at www.pastperfect.com. Please come visit us at As the Money Burns via GoodPods X, formerly Twitter, Facebook, now Mado, or Instagram. Transcript, timeline, episode guide, and character bios are available at asthemoneyburns.com.